before Wyatt gets out of here, I'd love to talk to him a little bit about Russia, Ukraine. I mean, this is a guy who the Kiev regime, and by the way, my good friend, both my friends Fiorella and Wyatt were on Ukrainian hit list, and I never made that list. Garland Nixon made it. Me and Wilmer were sitting there like, why didn't we make the hit list? We had to work harder. But I got put on a right-wing Ukrainian hit list, and my man Wyatt pointed it out for me and sent me the article. I was like, holy cow, I'm connected to General Flynn and his brother. I didn't know that what's going on. And I made a Ukrainian hit list, but once again, I am still kind of like intrigued and admiring my good friend Wyatt, who they sent a missile to his goddamn hotel room when he was out there. That was some time ago, but I know you've been paying close attention to what's going on. We played earlier today, Wyatt, the Donald Trump statement. It's like, Victory Day in Russia is whatever, but, we're the ones who really won the war. It was up to us. We had Captain America and the Avengers going at the late stages, and we won that war, so we're going to have our own Victory Day. Everybody knows. Like we teach it in school, it was the Americans. And he didn't show up there. We had 19 global leaders there, Xi Jinping, Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah.
You had Miguel Diaz-Canel from Cuba was over there. I even like the fact, and we didn't even talk about that both the Armenian and the Azerbaijan president showed up, who were really at war with each other. But that's how the power of the Russian Federation is. They can have enemies show up and at least for that day settle down. What are your thoughts on what's going on as far as, this war, we're going to end it in 24 hours there, Wyatt. I got my watch going. It's still going on. The drones that were going into Moscow the other day that had to be shot down right before the truce, right? The 3-day truce they were supposed to have. Those were American-made drones, and there's still sanctions on RT and Sputnik. Nothing has been lifted off the media sanctions. What are your thoughts on the 24-hour war that was supposed to be ended by Donald Trump that still hasn't been ended?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard kind of similar pledges from American presidents before that they made on the campaign trail, about Vietnam and other things that were not honored afterwards, or certainly not in the time frame that they were promised. But I think that was probably a pretty tall order, the idea that he was just going to get Putin on the phone and get Zelensky on the phone and lay down the law. That would only happen. The only possible way for that to happen is if he calls up Vladimir Putin and says, "What do you want? We'll give it to you," and then calls up Vladimir Zelensky and tells him, "Here's what's happening." But that doesn't seem to have been quite what happened. Instead, we kind of have this drawn-out sort of withdrawal process by which the U.S. is increasingly trying to wash its hands of this and dump it on the Europeans, who were so anxious to have all this happen in the first place. And in that sense, I don't know. I guess I've heard a lot of people kind of portraying the mineral deal as a net negative for the Russian side, because it's kind of going to tie the U.S. to this country. I'm not really sure that it does. I think it, I have to actually go through the documents and double check all this, but from what I'm understanding, it's the United States is still not really obligated in any sense to send any kind of troops or arms or anything, as far as I can tell. It basically just gives them kind of options in case, some profitable mine is found that some American company decides they want to exploit. Basically, it seems like they get 50% of profits, and I'm sure they get preferable kind of preferential treatment, I should say. And then we've heard this kind of statement from J.D. Vance that Trump sort of backed up, saying that the Russians are asking for too much, which doesn't surprise me either. I mean, they're asking for everything that they want because they have the momentum on the battlefield. They have a massive manpower advantage. And there's sort of an inevitability setting in, I think, on the Ukrainian side that we're losing, and we're losing quickly. And that kind of acknowledgement of, there is a real manpower shortage. There are only so many men who you can send to the front, and there's only so many men who you can pick up off the street and kidnap from their cars before society breaks down. I mean, my sense of the guys on the front lines is that these aren't professional soldiers. Most of Ukraine's professional fighting forces is not being expended to just kind of hold trenches in eastern Ukraine. So there, that question of the ticking time bomb for Ukraine, that's a real one. So I think there's a sense here to create the illusion of a victory for Ukraine, on motivating the Ukrainian side to take a deal that they probably would not have accepted a few months ago. And, to kind of, because throughout the past 3 years, that's basically what the Ukrainian strategy has been, is that image and, PR campaigns are the main most important thing. And whatever the tactical stuff that's happening on the actual battlefield, we can paper that over, we can dress that up nice in the press, but it's kind of a secondary importance. What's really important is that we hold Bakhmut, or we hold, some other, we hold Krinky on the other side of Kherson, and you'll have the military planners and the strategists and certain elements of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine saying, "Wait, hold on. Why are we spending tens of thousands of soldiers holding this backwoods town in the middle of nowhere?" And everyone will come up and say, "Oh, well, it's actually strategically significant because it sits here between this front and the other." And it always was just because, well, this was something that Zelensky got attached to, and he made it a major leg of his public relations strategy.
Yeah.
And he was unwilling to give up some symbolic town here or there, despite knowing that thousands of his troops are being slaughtered to hold on to it. That's kind of the whole. It's kind of the whole reason why the Ukrainians are in the situation that they're in now. They never really seemed to grasp that they're fighting an old school war with an old school opponent who doesn't care if they get mean things said about them on CNN, and it doesn't matter. And that's, still doesn't really seem to have sunk in, and I think it probably won't until there's regime change in Kiev.
And I think that's the only way this ends, is regime change in Kiev. And, let me tell you, the reason why it works, that PR battle that you're talking about, where they can hold on to this backwards ass, half-ass wooden town over there, right, is because Americans buy it, hook, line, and sinker. They're so naive to what's going on there. Oh, did you hear that Ukraine is held part of Russian territory inside Russia proper? But here's the other PR battle. If you could put that up, Matt, what I have there is the fact it's really never been about peace. Donald Trump has never been the peace candidate. He's always been, and this reminds me of, I don't know if you remember when Donald Trump was sitting up there with the MBS and the Saudi prince, his first term, and he was talking about, look at all these weapons we sold, but all these weapons and stuff like that. Well, the Trump administration readies first sale of military equipment to Ukraine. Okay, so now we're not being a chump anymore. Why? We're not giving them weapons on Joe tax dollars. Now, the State Department certifies license for $50 million or more in defense hardware and services after the mineral deal signed. So Donald Trump was in there, art of the deal. He gets the minerals, and now he's going to allow Ukraine to buy weapons. It's not coming out of Joe. It's all about, we're not being taken. They're paying their fair share.
So maybe they are serious. Yeah. So maybe they are more serious about collecting on these minerals than I realized.
But they don't have the means and the necessary ways to drill them and extract them properly. They have all the minerals here. They're not even extracting properly because they don't have the means to do it. It's they want to just stop China from getting it. That's it. That's the argument.
Yeah. Well, because the question still becomes, who wants to invest in a war-ravaged country where you have to demine the entire area before you can get started drilling, and who knows when the shells could start flying again. There you can't get stuff like that insured. It's not. It becomes basically impossible, or practically impossible, or very least totally infeasible from a business perspective. So my question is, unless they have, or my point, I guess, is unless they actually have a real meaningful peace with Russia, all of those concessions are more or less worthless, because who's going to want to take advantage of them? So maybe I need to read up more on that.
They're not worthless in the sense that it's the PR part of it, right? So now we're not looking at this this never-ending cash flow.
You can sell it to the MAGA base a little more easily.
That's how you sell it. It's the art of the deal. And then MAGAs are high-fiving. They're still calling him a peace president, but it's the same. It hasn't really put an end to anything. And then again, like you're saying, they're both saying that the mineral deal itself isn't really a good deal. It just looks better that we're not just writing blank checks and not getting anything for it. So it presents better. That's how I'm seeing it. And then of course, like there's enough of the MAGA base that's going to keep making excuses of every time the can's kicked down the road, and you got Marco Rubio botching these, getting in this stalemate and not getting out of it. And then here we are, more weapons to Ukraine. Do you guys remember? I was thinking about the BlackRock deal that happened way back with Biden, where they spent BlackRock and some other of these weapons companies. They spent close to, I think it was $500 billion on buying up parts of Ukraine, making Ukraine into an actual, like, you could literally call it Ukraine LLC. So when I see the mineral deal, I start thinking, well, is this for the U.S. or is this for which companies are capitalizing on this situation when Trump makes a deal like this? Because BlackRock already came in. They already are a massive player in what happens with the property in Ukraine and how they're going to make more money off of it in the future.
I know they were heavily focused on the kind of the agricultural scene. I'd have to go revisit the terms of that deal. From what I remember, it was mainly kind of the farm. They kind of wanted to basically seize the farmland.
The grains. The grains. Don DeBar did some great work on it too. But if Kiev were to get destroyed to be rebuilt back in a 5-minute city, BlackRock would be a part of that. BlackRock and Vanguard. But that hasn't happened yet in the script. I think that's coming.
That's season 3.
A few chapters season in. 3. Yeah.
I'm in the wrong season. We're still in season 2. Season 3 will be, Well, listen, what do you say to the argument or the theory? Obviously, when I watch a lot of Judge Knapp, right? Because Judge Knapp has on the leftist ex-spooks in Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. They do a thing every week. And then, obviously John Kiriakou is another, what I consider a leftist ex-spook. But when you listen to a lot of what they have to say, they're talking about what's really going on in actual real time from a military perspective. When you listen to people like Fiorella and Vanessa Beeley, they will tie into what happened in Syria as part of a deal that what's going to happen in Ukraine, Russia. And a lot of people had thought that the Russian Federation and Putin had turned their back on Assad. An agreement to help out the Israelis allowed them to take territory and the West to do what they have to do in return for a ceasefire and stopping of the war in Russia. I think it's more to that. To me, I thought maybe a deal is done where they say, all right, well, listen, we'll turn our back on Syria. Assad's gone. And you allow us to, you turn your back and we're going to take Kiev. Right? Because I can't see this war ending where Russia would ever be satisfied unless that regime was completely removed. Because no matter what, you can go back to since the end of World War II, the West has always tried this with an Orange Revolution we stood behind. We've always tried to use Ukraine as a proxy. And that regime, especially when you talk about the Western Ukraine, is very much in line with Europe. And they'll always want to kill Russians. So I can't see that ending unless Russia takes the whole country. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just say that they did have a neutral president, Yanukovych,
and they got rid of him.
Years. He was removed in a U.S.-backed coup d'état in 2014, thus setting the stage for the acceleration of hostilities and the big bad Russian invasion of 2022. So it is possible, and I mean, historically looking at Ukraine, that's kind of the role that is played over hundreds and hundreds of years is kind of, we're not going to go fully to the west. We're not going to go fully to the east. We're kind of going to play both sides against each other, and try to get the best deal possible. Something like, kind of a modern day Turkey, in many ways. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point that, have people on both sides potentially been so polarized by what's happened over the past couple of years that, they basically can't even stand to live together. That's a good possibility. I don't really think that long term Putin or many Russians in general want to be occupying Western Ukraine. I don't think they want to for economic reasons, because it would cost a ton of money. For military and national security reasons, because it would basically be kind of an open store that they would constantly have to be spying on and responding to various little guerrilla strikes and that kind of so-called resistance movements. So I think from the Russian perspective, I think they are open to some kind of a deal if they think it's actually going to be honored. And that's, the major sticking point is how do they make the West prove that they're actually serious about sticking to their word this time,
Absolutely.
since they didn't the past two deals that were made.
2 deals. Oh, geez. They said that NATO wouldn't infringe. Minsk 1, Minsk 2. I mean, it's
right.
The hits
Every
keep going
time.
on.
Right.
They did it again. We did it again every damn time.
It's like Lucy pulling the football, and they keep going for it over
Right.
there.
And at a certain moment, Linus probably gets tired of kicking the air. And I mean, to their credit, the Russians are playing along with these negotiations, and they seem, by all measures, to be engaging in good faith, not to be, saying one thing and then doing another, but actually saying, well, here's our conditions. We need to have this dealt with, and we can't entertain this at this stage until you guys are willing to meet us on these points. I mean, that's not what you'd want if you were an American diplomat, but it is certainly a respectable stand, and it hasn't changed throughout the whole course of the war. Their main asks have remained entirely consistent, which is, they want the denazification of Ukraine, which is, code word for no more Banderites in office, no more Banderites running the military, no more deranged people whose entire existence is based around killing Russians running your country. And that's, shorthand for regime change, I would say. And
What I'm talking about. Yeah.
And then they want, these territories, the so-called Novorossiya, new Russian territories, that they say, is not really negotiable, and Crimea. So, the main kind of asks that they started out with that could have basically been signed even before the war or at Istanbul in April 2022, before hundreds of thousands of people died in this war. Those are going to be kind of the main outlines. And, I'm not sure that there's that much more willingness from a Russian side to be the overseer of central or western Ukraine, because it's going to kind of be like, well, look at these crazy people. They don't want to be a part of us, and it's I could see up to kind of Kiev, but I think if you go further west than that, you would be signing up for a big old can of worms to be opened at some TBD date down the road that, not to be inside for the Russians.
Well, I think they go to Kiev and they say, Poland, you got to take the rest of Western Ukraine over there. They can't have their own country, and they make sure they adopt into Poland and put it on Poland's shoulders.
Yeah, that's a theory I actually first heard floated by Gonzalo Lira. I remember a couple of years ago, and it's interesting, although the
unrealistic
idea that Poland is gonna basically be allowed by NATO to go along with it, I think is questionable. I'm not sure whether, they would want to sign off on doing the same thing that Russia does, quote unquote, of, we're just doing a straight up land grab, it kind of undermines their whole argument that they've been making, that this is the biggest problem for Europe since World War II, that somebody's rewriting the rules of the international order if they themselves are rewriting the rules of the international order. But obviously hypocrisy has never stopped NATO, so.
Hey, Matt, we got to get WYATT out of here because it's 5:02 over here. And but I think that we should at least show what I got shared over there, because when WYATT wins the internet for the day, you got to show it. Breaking from WYATT Read. Crowds are rejoicing in St. Peter's Square after Venezuelans Juan Guaido declared himself interim pope. Way to go, WYATT Read.
It's still funny.
Yeah.
And fuck you if you disagree. Sorry.
Well, the other one I have is this. Check this one out really quickly. Let me see if I can. No, that's not the one I want. Hold on. See this one right here. I don't know if you'll appreciate this as much as some people out there. Let me see. Share screen. Here it is. This one. Go ahead, Matt. Chicago produced a pope before a quarterback who throws 4,000 yards. I don't know who won the internet of the day, WYATT or Annie Agar. Thank you so much today for coming here, WYATT. Matt, you got any last things for the man before we get him out of here? He's got surfing lessons. Let's go.
No, listen, these are the conversations we have to have. You mentioned Gonzalo Lira. I want to say we had a shout out RIP to Gonzalo Lira. This is that same hit list that we talked earlier on. Why we're all connected to this. The more bold and brave journalism we do, the more we're going to get on lists, and the more we're going to end up, fighting and swinging and going down with a fight like Gonzalo Lira did. But I appreciate you're on the right side of history every time you stick it to the war machine. So thank you for all the work you do, and I own the Grayzone for sure. Thanks for taking the time with us.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks so much, Boston.
Good to hear from you, brother. I'll see you soon, man. I'll see you soon. Remember, biker boys, we never die. We never die. My biker boy over there. Love you, WYATT.
All right, guys.
All right, take care.